Hello lovely people, my name is Emma and today we are going to be talking about European history. So I've been trying to look at my bookshelves and see sort of what history books do I have in different areas outside of just Britain. I did 2 recommendations videos about British history, but I've been trying to broaden my horizons, and in doing so I wanted to put together some recommendations videos for other countries that I've got fun history books to read. So today's focus is going to be Europe. We do have a world history one that is either about to come out or already come out. I don't know what order these guys are going out in. So I will link everything in the various comments down below. So let's jump in, shall we? The first one I want to talk about got mentioned in my non-fiction November recommendations, and that is The Romanovs by Simon Seberg Montefiore. The title kind of suggests it's about Russian history, specifically the Romanov family, who were a ruling monarchy who lasted, I think, like 3 centuries or something ridiculous. So this is a beast of a book, but totally worth the read. It was so interesting to look at a long sweeping look at Russian history, although it is focused, like I say, on royalty, monarchy and more of the military, so you don't get much of a snapshot of sort of your average person's life in Russia. And then especially the sort of more modern side, where it was looking at the downfall of the Romanovs and looking at the Tsar at the time and sort of Alexei and Anastasia and everything that went down there with the Bolsheviks, which is an area of history that I find really, really fascinating. Anything this big and sprawling that covers such a wide range of sort of time periods, there are going to be areas that you find more interesting than others. Catherine the Great is also mentioned in here if that's an area that you're interested in, and I do think it's incredibly accessible. I did big chunks of this on audiobook, and I would recommend that for any big chunky non-fiction books, frankly. And yeah, really, really good read. We're actually going to be hanging out in Russia for a little bit, just because I quite enjoy Russian history in general. The next book is by Gorky and it's called My Childhood. So this is a series of autobiographies by a gentleman called Gorky, who is a Russian classic writer, and this details, as the title suggests, his childhood. I think he goes on to write 3 or 4 more that cover his whole life. I've not actually read any more of them. This is one of my dad's favourite books, and it really is a snapshot of what it means to be sort of a Russian, essentially peasant, in sort of turn of the century. Yeah, he's sort of a boy in the late 19th century. So yeah, really, really interesting look at sort of the poverty that they were experiencing, the kind of lives that they lived, and sort of what their house situation was and what his sort of family relationships were, because he was sort of inching towards when we were then going to get the Bolshevik Revolution, so there was still a little bit of unrest already at that point. Very interesting, almost sort of tied with the Romanov book, because this is going to give you the everyday person's perspective that the Romanovs is definitely missing. Well worth a read. And then bringing it way forward to slightly more modern day Russia, we have Kursk, The Last Mission by Robert Moore, and this is the best-selling true story of a missing submarine that basically gets stranded, and it is about the rescue attempts and sort of Russia's interactions with the world watching this crisis and how Putin ended up handling it. Fascinating. There is like a movie, as you can see, because Colin Firth is on the cover, and there is also a documentary about it. So as it look at sort of some of the lies that were told by Russia about how the rescue attempts were going, as well as sort of the international rescue attempts and the way that different countries work together. So interesting from that side of things. Plus you get to learn a lot about submersibles and about submarines and submarine rescue, which is also really cool and kind of taps into like my science nerds out there. So this is a double whammy of some interesting modern history as well as some fun science. So really great. One of these books that I like sat down and devoured in an afternoon because I had to know what was going to happen. Great book. Recommended by my hubby. He's got excellent taste. The next book I wanted to mention is Homage to Catalonia by George Orwell. This is a real sort of classic non-fiction. George Orwell is obviously well known for Animal Farm in 1984, but he has a huge collection of non-fiction which I would totally recommend. And this is about a time in the Spanish Civil War which happened just before the Second World War, and sort of was involved in some of the lead up to that. And it is his time sort of on the front lines as a journalist, and then his attempts to try and get out of Spain when everything was going a bit pear-shaped. I read it a while ago, but I definitely really enjoyed it. I love Orwell's writing. I think he has such a wonderful, lovely, lyrical writing style, and this was no different. And it was really interesting learning about sort of the men's, he was sort of in the trenches as such, not with like formal actual dug trenches, but that kind of idea of really being on the front lines and chatting with the men, learning about why they were fighting, and also the kind of tactics that they had and some of the difficulties with supply chains and things. One thing I did find a little bit frustrating about this book was there was a bunch of appendices that detailed essentially the history of Spain and why this was happening, and I would have preferred that information to have been more interwoven with the story rather than, or with his experiences, rather than just being a big lump of static facts at the end. And I can't remember if I even actually managed to finish all the appendices or not. So in terms of advancing my knowledge about the Spanish Civil War, I'm definitely still quite hazy on some of the details, on the sort of more macro sense of it, but the actual kind of grittiness of being on the front lines, being on the pavement as such, was definitely very visceral and really well expressed. And Orwell is amazing. You should just read literally everything he's ever written. The next book I'm going to mention is a little bit of art history in there as well, and that is The Unfinished Palazzo by Judith Mackrell. This is life, love and art in Venice, and it's specifically about a building in Venice and the 3 different women who have owned it over the years. It is the Unfinished Palazzo, as it is named. So it's a really interesting look at sort of Venice's position within Italy, and also within sort of the art world as it was very much known for a long period of time, and sort of the various movie stars, artists and sort of celebrities of the time who flocked there and their experiences. So the 3 women, we have a wealthy heiress called Marchesa Luisa Casita, we have a notorious British socialite, Doris Castle-Rose, and then the American heiress Peggy Guggenheim, which is very much the reason why I read this book, because Peggy Guggenheim is incredibly interesting. So she sort of pioneered people like Jackson Pollock, and those kind of artists sort of really helped their careers. So it is an interesting look at pop art and sort of more modern art and postmodernist art and that whole side of things as well. So you're going to get a really interesting look at a lot of different areas of 20th century history. So very good fun, totally worth a read. Going back in time a little bit more, we have Tulip Mania by Mike Dash. This is the story of the world's most coveted flower and the extraordinary passions it arouses. Or more specifically, it is about the tulip bubble and then burst, the first sort of economic bubble that had formed ever, which happened in Holland in the 1600s, and for some reason tulips were just the best thing on the planet and people were spending absolute fortunes on them. This book looks at why that happened, the economic consequences of it, the people who made their fortunes, the people who were ruined. It's a fascinating history on economics, as there are some parts of it that discuss it with tulips and bulbs becoming the first examples of like future shares, the interesting ways that haggling and the trade market formed, and then how the crash happened. And it's also a wonderful snapshot of what it was like to be in Holland in the 1600s, where you get a lot of conversations about sort of the zeitgeist of the time, sort of the energies of this idea that you could become your own self-made man. It almost feels like the American dream, but sort of, you know, several hundred years earlier in a completely different country. And then what it was like to be your everyday person in Holland, dealing with these, if you were like a merchant and you were trying to make a name for yourself. There is also then a brief foray into Turkish history as well. You get a double whammy here, because there is a king who was apparently obsessed with tulips, and you get to find out about that, where there was also like a mini different economic bubble and burst situation happening at a completely different part of the world. So a little bit of a double whammy. We do drift out of Europe in this one. Really, really fascinating, and for something that sounds quite boring, is completely riveting. Like seriously, this book is a real page turner. Then my final book is Europe by Tim Flannery, and I think I've done so well in these past 4 videos for not just mentioning archaeology and paleontology over and over and over again. This is probably pushing it on the history front. This definitely is more of a paleontology book, but it's a look at Europe just after the Jurassic extinction, after, you know, the dinosaurs no longer existed, and sort of a look at the collection of islands that we now know to be Europe because of the flooding that took place, and how various animals sort of evolved there, and what did our world look like at that point. It's really good. There is a weird trend of Tim to think that Europe is better than other areas of the country, or other areas of the world, sorry, which was sort of a weird energy to bring to a book about paleontology and something that happened like literal millions of years ago. But if you ignore that fact, there's some really, really cool science in here, cool paleontology. You get to learn about gigantic flying pterosaurs and like, you know, weirdly huge turtles and stuff like that. It's just generally good fun all around. So there you have it. Those are some books about European history, some specific countries in there, and hopefully after I've done my Around the World in 12 non-fiction, I'll be able to do another one of these because I'll have a bunch more books from Europe that I know about. If you have any recommendations in the comments down below about particular areas of European history you think I should read about, any particular books, do let me know. I've got plenty on my want to read already, but we always love adding more to that non-fiction. And if you've read any of these and disagree with any of my thoughts, please do let me know as well. Have a wonderful reading week, and I'll chat to you soon. Bye.